recording, and we'll start first with the agenda. We have new committee members that we'll need to do in 2022. So if you have an interest in sharing your skills on a North Texas AHRMM committee, we would love to hear about your interest. You might just get recruited if you don't volunteer. So just wanted you all to know that that opportunity is out there. We appreciate you all coming and joining us today. As we're all, well into the world of the pandemic, the virtual meetings have been our way of staying in touch with our chapter and with our members. And we're all looking forward to the day when we can see each other and meet in person. So this is our agenda. Once we go through a few other things, we'll turn it over to our speaker today, which is Taylor Van Allen. Taylor is with Vizient now, and he is going to be providing us some Excel tips and tricks for supply chain. So I know everybody's excited to hear about that. These are our board members and current committee chairs. So take a look at what we've got, and if you have an interest, you are welcome to contact Tim or myself or Jeff or Melissa or anyone that's on the executive board. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll pass it on to the other members of the board. So we have a resource library, and this is now available to all of our North Texas AHRMM members. If anyone has an interest in this, I'm going to ask Taylor to kind of explain where this is and what's on there.
Thank you very much, Mary. So if you will advance to the next slide, our North Texas AHRMM Resource Library is conveniently located in this nice red button on our homepage, northtexasarmm.org. If you click that, it will take you to the North Texas AHRMM Resource Library, and I can share my screen here in a second so you can see how it works. But it's basically just a list of our resources. You can use the search function in that input box right there, and it will filter the list based on any of the keywords that might be in any one of those 5 columns. And if you have a new resource that you want to suggest to add to this library, there's a link right there that says email us and let us know. That goes to the email address that you see at the bottom of the screen, which is northtexasarmm@gmail.com. So would love to hear your suggestions. If you have anything, any certifications or learning resources that you feel would be a value add for the rest of the membership, then please do let us know. And Mary, if I can share my screen here, I'll show them how it works.
Okay, I will stop sharing.
Okay.
And let you go.
All right. So this is our northtexasarmm.org homepage. This is the resource library link. And then it pops up here. As I said, there's a search box here. So right now we're going to be learning some Excel training, but there are some other resources here as well. So if you went into the search box and typed Excel, it would filter the list. And then you have the links to the websites and also YouTube channels if they are available. In this list, we do have links to our North Texas AHRMM homepage, the National AHRMM homepage, and then also if you're interested in certifications as well, we have CMRP certification linking back to the AHRMM National site, and then some Six Sigma certifications as well. And then job postings, things like that. And then the tutorials and courses resources that we have here towards the bottom. They do, start out, or they do increase in difficulty kind of from here downward. The easiest being, or some of the most basic stuff being here at the top, and then once you get down into some more advanced stuff like programming languages and things like that. So I would advise you, if you are going to try to start anywhere in here, click some of these links and see where your skill set is currently, and then just kind of advance down the list. Again, if you do have a resource that you feel like you want to get added to the site, click this link and send us an email. And then pull up the point, get back to this, and I can introduce myself. So with those announcements being over, let me introduce myself. I am Taylor Van Allen, the North Texas AHRMM Educational Committee Chair, and today's speaker, talking about Excel tips and tricks for supply chain. So there we go. This is going to be Halloween themed for those of you that have opened the download files. You may have seen one of the Excel trainings that we have in here. But the first question that I want to kind of pose to the group as we get started is, how many hours a day are you spending in Excel? If you are shy, you can drop it in the chat. Otherwise, come off of mute and let me know kind of how many hours are you spending in Excel every day. I'm assuming there's a reason that you're here to learn a little bit more.
Taylor, this is Brian Green. I'm roughly in there probably about an hour and a half to 2 hours a day.
Okay. Anybody that can beat that?
6 hours a day.
6 hours a day. Let me guess. Rosanna?
Yes.
Yes. Awesome. Yeah. And depending on the kind of stuff that you do, I'm sure there's going to be quite a bit. Michelle, looks like you got 2 to 3 hours a day. Anybody that can beat 6 hours? Tracy, you got 8 hours. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So my point being that Excel is pretty much everywhere. And especially for some of the stuff that we do in supply chain, there is quite a bit of involvement in Excel. If you've got a data set, if you've got a data set that you need to work through, which I think a lot of us are gonna have specific tasks that we're working through all day, every day, and some tips and tricks that you can start with. We're going to go through some of those today and try to save some time and hopefully learn a few things as well. Advance here. So, what are some of your reasons for learning Excel? I know that a lot of them are going to be related to job function, but is there something specific that you are looking for in some of these trainings? Again, if you're shy, go ahead and drop it in the chat. Otherwise, feel free to come off mute.
I want to save time.
Okay, excellent. Anybody else?
Time. Feel confident in your answers when you're doing pivots or VLOOKUPs or just different functions.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody have problems with VLOOKUPs? Do your formulas break? Things like that?
I think VLOOKUP just doesn't like me.
Sometimes we get the triangle of death.
Oh no.
And the new spill thing is kind of interesting.
The new spill thing?
Mm-hmm. Where
Can you elaborate?
Have you done a VLOOKUP lately where they put they will warn you that this will spill over to other cells? Have you not had this?
I haven't seen it.
Oh my God, I have it happen all the time. I just learned to. Yes, I am. Okay, I'm going to go away now.
Well, I'd love to see that happen. I mean, I love when something breaks. I love seeing that stuff. It means
Okay, well,
you're trying brand new stuff.
I will make a screenshot for you.
Excellent. I can't wait to see it. So yeah, it looks like some people are having some problems with VLOOKUPs. I got good news for you. We're going to do some today. Uh, some common reasons that people cite for learning Excel: marketability of your skills, which could lead to increased salary, and then also, as we heard a little bit earlier, time savings as well. So today we're going to learn some of those. And if you feel like you're a beginner in Excel, we're going to go through some brief overview. So if you feel like you're a little bit behind, hopefully by the end of this, you won't feel quite that way. You'll feel a little more confident as well. So as we talk about what's advanced Excel, air quotes, what does everybody feel like? What is the thing that you're trying to get to that makes you feel like it's advanced? And I know we also have some hiring managers and directors and VPs in the room. So I know that these are in the job descriptions. So I'd like to hear from some of you guys as well. What do you feel like is advanced Excel?
Would say macros.
Okay. Macro, VLOOKUP, okay. Pivot tables maybe as well. Any other things that you feel like is advanced? Maybe Power Query or the advanced features. Anything else? If not, I will move on. All right. So Excel is powerful if you know how to use it, and a lot of that is learning what you don't already know. So I have a feeling that's why most of us are here today. So without further ado, let's take it over to Excel. It does say in the slide, stay until the end for a file download link, but so that you can follow along today, you have the download link. For those of you that have not clicked on it, feel free to do that and download the files that are in that zip folder. If you have any issues with your download or extracting the files, please do let me know. So let's actually get into Excel. And yes, it is Halloween themed. So today we're going to go over a few basics about cell references, and then between relative and absolute and what those mean, Excel ranges and Excel tables and the differences between those. And then once we get into tables, something called structured table references in your formulas. And then everybody's favorite request, a VLOOKUP. So, and at the end, when we do this VLOOKUP, we're going to take some sample spend data and we are going to incorporate that with some item descriptions and categories. So let's get started. Cell references, as they exist in Excel, are basically the cell's address in the Excel grid. If you're familiar with the game Battleship, this should be pretty familiar to you. Again, this is for people that are just kind of starting out in Excel. Your columns are represented by letters, your rows by numbers, and a combination of the two will give you a specific cell. Relative versus absolute cell references, by default, anything that looks like a standard letter and row combination, letter and number combination, that is a relative cell reference. So when you type something in a formula, perhaps equals A1, that you're referencing the value in A1. There is something also for absolute cell references, which means that you can lock them. And I think an example may illustrate what I'm talking about. So when you're doing this sample order with some fun Halloween items in there, when you want to calculate an item total in this, for example, I'm going to take my price multiplied by my quantity. every formula is going to start with this equal sign. And when I click this price, again, you'll see that cell reference D24, and I'm going to multiply that by my quantity, which is going to be an E24. That by default is a relative cell reference, meaning when that gets calculated, and you'll see the formulas show up here that correspond to these cells. When I drag this down, it updates the rows relative to that formula. I feel like we have all done this. If you haven't, let me know if this is brand new material. But this is pretty much your standard when you calculate formulas in Excel. However, when you want to use a locked cell reference, for example, when we calculate this line sales tax, I have a fixed value here for my sales tax, and I want to apply that to each of my rows in the item total. So if I try to do this and then multiply by my fixed total, can anybody tell me what's going to happen when I drag this formula down?
You're gonna get errors.
Correct. You are going to get errors. Can anybody tell me why I'm going to get errors?
It's going to pull the next cell down.
Correct. Yeah. So it being a relative cell reference, it's taking the value that is over to the left and also over to the right and two up. Every time I drag this down, the next cell is going to take that relative position, one to the left and then over to the right and two up, in each one of these cells. So because I don't have a numerical value here, I'm going to get a value error because it's looking at line total and trying to multiply that by 9950. For the ones underneath this that are blank, that don't have anything in them at all, I get a 0 result. How do we fix that? Well, the best way to do that is to lock our cell reference here, and there's a shortcut key, which is the F4 key on your keyboard. So when I try to redo this formula and I press F4 on my keyboard, you'll see a couple $signs pop up, which is what's going to lock in on this absolute value right here. It locks in both on the column and the row, meaning if I drag this down, I should now get the expected result. And it will lock it in there. So handy dandy way to know if you've locked it correctly. If you don't see a $sign, it's unlocked. It's a relative reference. If you
Hey,
do
Taylor, we
Yeah.
have a comment. Somebody has shared they've learned something new already.
Excellent. Hopefully that solves some problems for more than just one person, but if it's just one, I've done my job. Excellent. I'm glad that that worked. So relative versus absolute, there's a demonstration right there. And when I'm calculating my line total, oh, good. It's working for more than just one person. Excellent. So now when I calculate my line total, again, I'm going to use relative cell references. I'm just going to add my item total and my line sales tax, and then drag this down again. Again, showing the relative references. And then bonus formula here at the bottom, summing up the lines by clicking and dragging there. Using the equals sum, I've now added up all of my line totals. And these are the formulas, again, that correspond with these cells. Just so you can see kind of what's going on here. Showing these for a single cell, again, with no dollar signs, this is your relative reference, so that when you copy across or down or whatever, it's going to update based on the relative location. Absolute, you're going to see the dollar sign in front of the row, the column and the row. You will also possibly see some mixed references. They're much more rare, but I did want to include them in case you saw them in some of these formulas. Only in front of the column, you could drag down and it would keep the values in the A column, so it would go A2, A3, A4, A5. If you dragged it across, however, it would across row 2, it would just be all equal to the value that's in A2. Same thing for your row lock. If you dragged this down, it would just be the value in A2, but if you dragged it all the way across, it would be A2, B2, C2, D2. And then also applying to what we're about to learn about, which is Excel ranges. This is just a grouping of cells. Again, you may see some of these for mixed references, but you're much more likely to see either the relative reference or the absolute. But wanted to include that note just in case you came across them. All right, so next, looking at Excel, sorry, actually, let me go back. Does anybody have any questions about what we've seen so far for relative and absolute cell references? Feel free to come off mute. Nothing? All right. Well, if you think of something, chime in. Now we're going to look at the differences between Excel ranges and Excel tables. Can anybody tell me the difference just off the top of their head? Has anybody used Excel tables? Has anybody been suggested to use Excel tables before?
I'm not allowed to heckle.
That was pointed towards you, Roseanne. I'm so glad you picked it up.
Is it
Tasha uses
possibly
tables.
that tables is like the selection and then range is, I don't know, I think it's very relative, but I'm thinking that range is maybe a piece here and a piece there, or, but not all the data. Just, I don't know.
That is a
Take a
good
stab
guess.
at it.
That's a good guess, but not quite. So the difference between a range and a table, a range is basically just kind of a collection of cells, but they're not necessarily grouped as far as Excel is concerned with it being an object. It's just kind of data has been input into these cells. You may have, and they have no spaces around them, no blanks around them. So the piece that I've got highlighted here, this is a range of cells. If I highlighted just these three, that's a range of cells. The difference being an Excel table, Excel recognizes it as an object, which means it has some different behavior, different functionality to it. So I'll show you by highlighting the same kinds of data. These are just some items here. Wolf's Bane, Eye of Newt, Deadly Nightshade, and some neck bolts, you know, for our Halloween friends. So an Excel table, turning a range into an Excel table, this is your shortcut right here. When you highlight the range, you can press Control T on your keyboard, and you'll get the dancing ants, or the little green lines that move around. I know this is really, really small, but the range that it's referencing is locked in with these dollar signs, meaning whatever formulas I'm going to use to reference this, it's only going to show me the data that lives inside of these cells. So when I do get the option to create a table here, I do have headers. So I'm going to keep this little checkbox checked. And I'm going to click OK. And you can see, all right, there's a difference here now. I don't just have, you know, a blank background with some text in it. I actually have some different design to it. I'm gonna change the font color there. I just like the way that looks a little better. So I've got a table here with some alternating colors to them. I also have some filters by default that allow me to filter pieces in the table. This, when you click into it, is an Excel table. It is an object in Excel, which means, as I said, you get some extra functionality. When I'm clicked into the range, I don't see something up here for the table design menu. But when I'm clicked into this, I now have a whole bunch of extra stuff that shows up. I can apply different colors if I want to. I can add a total row at the bottom. I have some options if I want to remove duplicates in my table, add some slicers for some of the later versions of Excel, Office 365, and I think all the way back to the 2013 version of Excel. But when I'm using these, there's some benefits to using an Excel table, which is why I'm a big proponent. Yes, this is being recorded, so we'll be able to refer back to this afterwards. The benefits of using Excel tables, the first one is if I add a new row, the edges of my table expand with it. Same thing if I add a column. So for example, so this is really helpful when you have to add new rows to a really large data set. If you're using a formula to count how many things you have in a range, it's only going to lock into, I'm going to show you real quickly here. I use this count A, it's going to count the number of non-blank cells in a specific range. If I do that with a table, and I want to add a new item, it automatically updates in my formulas. If I added another item here in the range, I don't get that functionality. So when you're using formulas, it's very, very helpful to use tables. And we'll see another example here. If I count the rows across, it will do the same thing. It will update. So count A, whoops, for my headers. And you may notice there's a little bit different syntax here. We'll get into that once we get into structured table references. I have 3 rows, or 3 columns, pardon. Now when I add another one, it automatically stretches the edges of my table to include this new row. Looking back at this formula, it counts the new column that I just added, which is great. By default, as you can see in this formula, I'm not sure how well that shows up, but it's count A for table 1. That's the name of the table by default that Excel gives it. You can rename these tables to be much more descriptive. In this example, I'm going to use the very descriptive name example table, so you can see what I'm talking about. Or if somebody has a fun Halloween-related word that they would much prefer that I use, the sillier the better. So throw anything out that you feel like. Pilots, okay.
Shopping list.
Shopping list, okay. So in this table design menu, if I want to rename a table, go up to table design. There's a little section in the properties tab. You can rename this from table 1. Boo table. All right, I'm gonna go with my shopping list. And now it automatically updates my formula as well. If I wanted to do this all over again and reference shopping list, when I start typing shopping list, it shows up as an option. And when I hit tab, it highlights the entire table. If I hit the open bracket, I can now choose a specific column if I wanted to. So how many things are in my items? 13. Oh, I mean, boo, table. Excellent. So there are some benefits here. It expands automatically. It makes your formulas a little bit easier to read so that you're not referencing a range like B12 to B22. You can actually read it in something a bit more descriptive, like example item, or sorry, example table item. If you have multiple tables, this is very beneficial. Uh, if you have 5 of the same table and one's named table 1 and then table 2, 3, 4, and 5, you may not remember what's in table 1 or table 4, but if you rename them, you can run formulas to get calculations on each of your tables. That's a little bit more intuitive to read. You also do get these banded rows by default, which is great for those of us that have thick glasses. And then if you apply a formula in a table, you also get the benefit of only having to type it in one cell and hitting enter. And it copies all the way down, which is really nice. It's a bit of a shortcut there, so some time savings as well. Any questions about Excel tables? Any comments about Excel tables? I see that some people have learned something new about tables.
I find that to be very interesting, and I don't know why. It may be the ERP system that we use with the uploads and things of that sort, but I find myself more often than creating tables, and haven't thought of a time when I have, but to remove them, like going to the design tab and removing the table or changing it to non-table.
Yeah,
So this is an eye opener. So I wonder if there's a shortcut to create it and then remove it when needed. Maybe not, because this opened some eyes, or opened my eyes for more things I could do.
yeah, that's a great question. So if you do have a table and you are not a fan, there is a really quick way to undo this. You can right click anywhere in the table
Hmm.
down to this little table option and then
Convert
convert
to
to
range. Ah,
range. Yeah.
okay, very nice.
Additionally, if you're in the table design menu, uh, kind of near this naming section
Uh-huh.
here, there's another button, convert
Yeah,
to
that's
range
where I
right there.
usually do it, but the right click will be easier for me. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Um, so yeah, if you don't want to automatically expand, if that's harmful for whatever process that you're doing, then yes, you can convert from a table back to a range, and I will do that now. And it will give me this little prompt that says, are you sure you want to do that? And yes, I do. Now I no longer have that table design menu. I don't have all these extra options. It does leave the styling on there though. So if you need to convert that back, you can use this little paint bucket here, come down to the no fill,
Yeah, for me, I
change
wouldn't.
your
It,
text.
it, it just, I was seeing the value of creating it as a table
Yeah,
and then changing it back to do the upload. So that works. Thank you.
yeah, of course.
Hey, Taylor, it's Brian Green.
Yeah,
If I wanted to move this table to another tab, would would that affect the reference or anything? Was it?
that's a really good question. The, I'm getting this, trying to come up to this, and my screen share keeps dropping down. So right now, so if you wanted to just move this list to another tab, you're saying?
Correct.
So in that case, I would highlight the whole thing, create a brand new tab, and paste it in here. Here's what's going to happen though. You're going to get a new table. Because, oh, sorry, this is way too small. You're going to get a brand new table with a similar name, it'll have a different number on there. So you'd have to go back to the original table and delete that one, and then just update the name to shopping list on this one.
Gotcha. Okay.
Since I do have two tables, so if I tried to rename this one shopping list while the other one still existed, I'm going to get this error message that says this name already exists, name should be unique. That's why you get, by default, when Excel creates a table, you get table 1, and then the next one is table 2, table 3. It will increment based on the stuff that you're trying to do.
So Taylor, a couple of questions in the chat.
Yeah.
Can you move or copy a table? And I think that's what you were showing, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then a question was, you can't just cut it instead of copying it.
Let's see. Got it. Paste it. You can. Excellent. Thank you. So yeah, that is a really good way to do that. Sorry, I've been doing it the wrong way this whole time. That's one of the great things about Excel. You learn new stuff every day.
That's the goal.
Yeah. So great question. Great question. All right. So yes, you can. You can copy, or sorry, you can cut and move to a new tab. Thank you, Roseanne. An alternative way, not the wrong way. Yeah, which actually brings up a really good point. There's multiple ways to get to whatever data transformations you're trying to do, and I just learned a new one myself. That's great. Any other questions or comments about Excel tables before we move on? Nope. Okay.
Well, I'm just going to add that Sherry had a better name than shopping list. She had Boo Table.
Boo table. Yeah.
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 So.
Yeah. Let's see. So I did also see another question about renaming your tabs, and does that affect anything in the formulas themselves? So depending on if you're doing a range or if you're doing a table, it will update the names of the formulas. But so for example, if you wanted to do formula here where I'm summing up something, or let's do a count. Of something here, you'll see here in the top, relative versus absolute cell ref is the name of the sheet, and then I've got a relative range there. This is the formula that you'll see. Count A, relative versus absolute cell ref. If I rename this page, sorry, this tab, this will update. So it should not affect your formulas. If you're referencing a table, however, you won't even see this. So if I did the same thing for different sheet, text here, regardless of what I've named this thing, you're going to see the name of the table itself. So if I change the tab name, it's not going to affect this one at all. Okay. Any other questions about Excel tables? Table is cut and put on a new tab. Will that formula follow? Let's find out. Looks like it does. These are great questions. These are some of the things I've not thought about. So just so you can see, I cut that table off of this one and put it onto this tab. And this is our shopping list table here. So yeah, it doesn't look like it's affected in any way. Your formulas won't break. Great news. Any other questions? Nope. All right. So as we saw in some of these formulas here, there's something called structured table references. This is what I was referring to earlier. Rather than having something where you kind of just get a cell reference or a range reference here, you actually get something a little bit more readable, more descriptive. So our previous example that we saw in the relative versus absolute order of items here, I'm going to show you the difference between using a range and using a table and how those kind of correspond between the formulas. We're going to do the exact same calculations that we did before, but you'll notice when I click into this, I get the name of the column instead of a cell reference. When I want to know item total, I can read the formula that it says price times quantity, which I think is going to make a lot more sense when you're trying to go back and troubleshoot why is something wrong if you do have anything that ends up that way. And then calculating our item total. Oops. And does anybody remember what I need to do here? How do I lock this?
Control F4.
F4.
Correct. Ding, 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 ding. F4, I have locked in on my cell for my row and my column. Again, with your tables, your formulas do copy down all the way down the column, so I only have to worry about the top row here, which is really nice. Again, some time savings there. And then for my line total, adding those two together. So a lot more readable than trying to remember what's in each one of these cells and going, okay, what's in D25? Okay, D25, that's my price. E25 is my quantity. You can just read it through. And then totaling everything here at the bottom equals sum. When I start dragging this down, I get a cell range reference here, but something interesting happens when I get to the end. It changes. I have named this table PO table. It changes to something a bit more readable. I know what this sum is about. Oh, I'm adding up the line total column in the PO table. Much easier to read. So that is our structured table reference example. Any questions about what has just occurred on your screen? Straightforward enough for everybody? Anybody know how they could use this now? Anything you've been struggling with that you've been trying to figure out? Large spreadsheets, anything that you can apply this to now?
I know I want to try it.
Well, there's a download link. Feel free to open up the example, follow along. And then of course the session's being recorded, so you can come back to it and kind of follow along at your own pace as well.
Nice.
Yeah. And then sorry, before we move on, any other questions, comments? If not, we'll move on to VLOOKUP, which I think is fun. A lot of people are here. Okay, VLOOKUP it is. Everybody's favorite and possibly most frustrating formula. This is the single most requested formula example that I get. Number one, how do I do a VLOOKUP? Number two, why does my VLOOKUP not work? So just so you guys know, in the download files, I do also have another another Excel file getting started with formulas. It has some of your basic math functions, but it also has a VLOOKUP example here as well with some extra information and some links. If you're a more visual person and you need a video, then this is very helpful. I am also a very visual person, so you get some practice there. And then just kind of some introductions to formulas, your averages, your min-maxes, your date times. So just some extra bonus content there. And then because of the frustration that a lot of people have with VLOOKUPs, there's also a couple PDFs for how to do a VLOOKUP and then a troubleshooter for your VLOOKUPs as well. For some reason, I have my mouse is not allowing me to click on it, so I think I have this up. Yeah. Here's an example here. This is the refresher for how to do a VLOOKUP. And then also when your VLOOKUPs break, here's some troubleshooting tips as well. Again, some bonus content for trying that out later. But we are going to do a VLOOKUP live. Does anybody know what VLOOKUP stands for?
Vertical lookup.
That's
Vertical
correct.
lookup.
That is correct. So if you've seen a VLOOKUP, for those of you that have checked the formula library, there's also an HLOOKUP. That is a horizontal lookup. That is not one that I use quite as often. In fact, almost never. A VLOOKUP is probably the one that I'm going to go to. There is also index and match, but I think that's going to get a little trickier. That's a nested formula. So why do we use a VLOOKUP? Anybody know that? I know you've heard the phrase before, but for those that have not used a VLOOKUP, what do you think it's for? All right, I'll tell you. When you use a VLOOKUP is when you want to combine data, yes, or compare data. You want to take, you want to be able to do a lookup on a shared value. For those of you that are familiar with SQL, it's basically your join key. In in an example here, if I wanted to look up a specific ID and return a description and a UOM out of this list, I would use a VLOOKUP. If I type in my search value here, there's some syntax explanations here, but I think a visual will be a little easier. Starting out, as always, with formulas, equal sign, VLOOKUP. You can either double click or you can press the tab key on your keyboard, and that will fill out the rest of the formula itself. So I'm going to look up this value next to it. I'm looking for this ID number. I'm going to look for it in this data set right here. This is, again, a relative reference. I would highly recommend if you have a fixed data set, your F4 key and lock that in. I think a lot of people, this is where, when people are trying to copy their formulas down, this is where they run into problems because you have a relative range. I always recommend locking that in. The next part of the formula is, all right, out of this range here, which column do I want? And in this case, it goes from 1, 2, and 3. I want to return what's in the second column, which is my description. I'm going to type the number 2. And the last piece is whether you want this to be an exact match or you want it to be kind of a fuzzy match, an inexact match. False will give you an exact match. True will give you that fuzzy match. I can't remember the last time that I used the fuzzy match. or the inexact match. I usually go for the exact match every time. So if I, oh, Roseanne, this is what you're talking about. Skill
I
formula.
love my life.
Of course, when I tried this, I prepared this for weeks at a time, and that never happened.
You don't have your first cell in there. You look at you didn't put a comma in after your first cell,
Oh,
so it ignored it when you typed the second one.
so how long have you been sitting on that, knowing that I was doing the wrong thing?
The entire time you did it.
Excellent. Okay, so great example of how it doesn't work sometimes. Excellent. Okay.
I had faith that you had something you were going to demonstrate by this, so that's why I didn't speak up.
Yes, that even quote unquote experts, advanced Excel users still make mistakes. Excellent. So now that I've done it in front of everybody, you shouldn't feel nervous about your VLOOKUP attempts. All right, so this is the formula that's in this cell. We're going to do the same thing for.
I think Lisa Hightower had a question.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Will this work from tab to tab within the same workbook? Yes, it will. It absolutely will. But the reference that you're going to get rather than B22 and then G22 through I31, you'll get a prefix of the tab name. So, for example, let's just do one out here. Equals VLOOKUP for this one that we had. Let's do one in the structured table references. Let's do this range, for example. I'm not sure if you can read this, but it says structured table references B25 through E29. Oh, actually, I need to have a lookup value. One moment. I'm looking up these items here, and I wanted to do a VLOOKUP. Looking up this value in this table array, returning the second value, trying to get that item description, and doing an exact match. It will work. Let me show you the formula that's in there. It'll look like that. But yes, it will still work.
Taylor, when you're inserting the formula, do you ever use the like? I usually go to the I call it the FX, but like the function arguments, and it's
The
easier
formula
for me to
wizard.
follow.
Yes,
Yeah,
you
easier
absolutely
for me
can.
to follow versus the formula kind of written out.
Yes, absolutely. So for those of you that don't know what we're talking about, there is a tab up here at the top for formulas. There is the insert function. You can also find it here at the beginning of your formula bar for insert function here. This is what's called the formula wizard. Any comment? Yes, yeah. It's a lot easier when you're trying to work through these. We'll do a VLOOKUP example there. This is really helpful. So this is the value that I want to look up in 21, and it gives you a preview of what you're going to come back with. So yeah, for those of you that like a little bit more consistency, and as Thomas said, it's kind of a cheater way to do this. However makes the most sense to you. There's, as we saw before, there's multiple ways to get this done. Excel specific, there are a lot of people that program this in. I'm sure they'd be very happy that you're using it. So for this table array that we just did, going to this page, pulling this in, you'll start to see some of the example data, looking up that column index, and then also you get a preview of what it's going to come back with here as the results, which is in this case vampire teeth. If I click OK, you can do the same thing using that that function wizard, and I'll highly recommend using it until you get a little bit more comfortable and you can just type the formulas in on the fly. All right. Any other questions about that? If not, we'll go back to this example. I'll use the formula wizard here for this VLOOKUP. I want to look up that same value that's in B22. Again, my table array here. Locking that in by pressing F4. Did that. There we go. Returning now the third column because I want the UOM and getting my exact match using false keyword. So now I have a description and a UOM for any ID that I input here. I can change this and it will go find the corresponding values in my list. Similarly, if I want to drag this down with a list, we'll do that in this spend data example. But if you have a list rather than a value that you want to change, you can do this instead with a group of values as well. And yes, Thomas, thank you for the comment. VLOOKUP also works across workbooks, so you don't have to copy a workbook into a separate tab and then copy and paste special values so you don't get errors. You can go from workbook to workbook if you wanted to go outside the scope of just the workbook that you're in. Good note, thank you. So now, I wanted to add something into this range, and I wanted to look up, say, ID number 11. I don't have a number 11 in this range, so I'm going to get these NA values. If you see NA, typically that means if I'm looking for something, it's not in this range. That's usually the first clue. It could be possibly some other errors, but that's the most common. So if I add something in here for ID number 11, anybody tell me why this formula is not updating? Why do I still have an NA?
It's outside of the range.
Correct, correct. Just because I added something here does not mean that in my formula that my range itself has updated. I'd have to go back into this and update my formula to include the new row. And now I would get this, but I have to do that for each VLOOKUP that I've done. The larger the spreadsheet you have, the harder this is going to be. So using an Excel table makes this a little bit easier, again, because the edges of your table expand. So if I do the exact same thing here, looking for ID number 1, doing a VLOOKUP for the description, I want to look up this value, which is my ID value, because this little lookup section is also a table. I now get the column header instead of a cell reference. I want to look for it in this table array. When I highlight the whole thing, oops. When I highlight this whole thing, rather than a cell reference, I get the name of the table. Again, structured cell references are very helpful here. I want to look in column number 2 out of 1, 2, 3. And I want an exact match. Again, this is a little easier to read than this. I'm going to do the same thing for my UOM. Looking up the ID in my lookup table, and I also type that out. Lookup data table. I want column number 3, which is my UOM. Again, an exact match there. Now, when I look for any of the other items, it works the same way. But if I look for ID number 11, again, not in my range, but now when I add this in, oh, I get zeros instead of NA because the edges of my table have updated. I don't have to have a broken formula there. VLOOKUP work if you also include the column title in your range. Depending on if you're just looking for a single column, yeah, it can totally work. Since I'm using an ID to look up the description, yes, I can do that. But I have to have at least the leftmost column as my lookup column, and then everything over to the right. Actually, Tracy, do you have an example of kind of what you're thinking?
All right. What I was saying is because I noticed that you were highlighting everything except for the title, the ID, description, UOM.
Oh yeah.
So I just want to make sure if you highlighted that as long all of that information that it would still work.
Yeah. So if you did the title as well, it would say lookup data all, and it would include the headers. So yeah, you can do that. Change that to this. Is that what you meant?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll still work. But it's just going to look and it says all by default because it's looking through the headers and all of this, but it's still going to look through in this range specifically, and it's not going to find 11 in the header. So yes, it would still work. Roseanne, cells are in text. Oh yes, okay, yeah. So yeah, another way that your VLOOKUP formulas may break is when you're looking up what seems like a numerical value. So for example, maybe an item number, and it has to do with data types. In one table, it could look like a number. In another table that you're using your lookup on, it will look, it will act more like text. There is a way to fix that. So to kind of illustrate here, if I'm looking up, if I remember my item numbers correctly, Roseanne, I believe that is your favorite item number.
Yes, that is my favorite item number.
Good, I'm glad. Okay, so if I'm looking up that item and my range here, I've treated this as text rather than a number. I think you'd actually have to have the little green arrow in front, which happens when you get this single quote in front of it. So if you've seen a number with that in front of it, that's what's going on. It's treating this number as a text data type instead. So if I'm trying to do a VLOOKUP between these two, looking up this value in that range, I want to find the description. Watch this work. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. So this is what happens. This is what you're talking about, Roseanne, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the reason that that happens is because this value is being treated as text, even though it doesn't look necessarily like that, it's adjusted to the left, and you do get that little green arrow in the top left corner. And this is a numerical or number data type right there. So the way that you can fix that is to look up this value using value formula, and it will find it for you. If you're trying
Wow.
to do,
That's not how I would have fixed it, but cool.
the other way you could do it is if you treated this value as a text value instead, just kind of swapping it, that would also work. Hopefully I'm gaining some of my Excel points back. Okay, any other questions about VLOOKUPs before we go do the example in the sample spend data and then pulling in item descriptions? Get back to tables. All right. Yeah, we can go back to tables. And then while we are waiting on that question, Brian, you have a question about an if formula. Okay. So if the VLOOKUP, or insert an if formula into the VLOOKUP to display a specific text for a particular return value. So i.e. display red if return value is NA. So, all right. Yeah, let's do that. So we know we had an NA here, like that. So you want this to display the word red, correct?
Right.
Okay. So yes, we would wrap this in an if formula. And actually, specifically this one, if you're looking for an NA value, you would do if NA. This is what happens if you don't return an NA value. And at the end, if you do have an NA value, we want to return the word red. So going back to that previous example, if I use the word value in here, just so you can see that this actually works. I get the item number, but if I do get that NA, it'll return back to red. Is that what you were talking about?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, yeah, no problem. Let's see, use tables, spreadsheet template, clear out the information and add a new table, and it doesn't work for all the data. I'm not sure if this is table or because I use a macro. That I'm not sure. We may have to talk about that one offline. I'm not sure that I can conceptualize that one. You can get with me after the call, or send me an email to northtexasarm@gmail.com, and we can go over that. Yeah, no problem. Anybody else? Frustrations with your VLOOKUP formulas? If you do, again, we can. I've included those PDFs. These troubleshooting tips are very helpful. So there's also a lot of resources in the tutorials about VLOOKUPs in the resource library, which we'll go back over that before we end the session today. Let's see, we also have a request for a trim formula. So you're trying to remove white space from the left and right side of a text string, is that correct?
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
I'm talking about you said any more problems with VLOOKUPs. And we've had, as you well know, we've had problems when we have spaces that are there that we can't see. So we have to trim them.
Yes.
The data.
Yes. Actually, I think the best example of that may be, all right, so if I got a whole bunch of extra spaces out here that I can't necessarily see with my eye, but if I look in the formula bar, I can see that there's a few extra spaces there. So removing this part of the if formula here, I want to try to do a VLOOKUP this way. Are you talking about in conjunction with a VLOOKUP or just trimming something?
No, I'm talking about in conjunction. Am I on mute? No, I'm talking about in conjunction with the VLOOKUP, where
Okay.
we'd get NAs, and we're like, no, I can even see one right there, and then that's when we realize, oh, there's hidden spaces that are not making these things the same.
Yes, okay. So I think the easiest thing to do, and before we do the VLOOKUP part, this is what I use. I use the substitute formula, which I would click on here. Let me scoot this over so you guys can see this a little easier. And so if I'm looking in this value and I want to replace all the white space, this is how I would do it. So in this P39 cell, I want to replace all instances of this space. I wrap just the space in double quotes. And I want to return no spaces. So I just do a pair of double quotes there. And in this case, just so you can see this, I just pasted the values, all my spaces are gone.
And
So
that's
the
why
substitute,
you're the champ.
the substitute formula is going to get rid of all of the white space, regardless of where it is. If you did a trim, it may get rid of the left or the right or something like that. But if you're trying to just remove all white space, I would recommend using the substitute instead.
Cool.
Yeah. So wrapping that in a VLOOKUP, for example. So look up this value. I'm going to convert this back to a number. Oh, no, I won't. The number wouldn't have all those extra spaces. This table array. So yeah, this is the error that you were talking about. But if I take what's in cell P39 and wrap that in the substitute formula, oh, it didn't work. Right? Oh, because this is still a number. So I have to treat this as a value. Now it works. So yeah, sometimes you have to nest multiple formulas in there to actually get this thing to work. You have to remove all the white space and have your data types match. But that would work. I think at this point, yes, we are definitely in the advanced range of Excel formulas.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, Taylor, you're in way advanced, and I'm in the just do this, click this twice. I just do trim this column. Okay, cut and paste it back as values. Move on. And you have a whole formula here I never even heard of before.
Well, to be fair, I'm probably doing it in a more complicated way than it would probably best to do. I think in this case, you might want to do a find replace and find a space value and replace it with nothing. And then I don't know if that even worked. But yeah, you may want to just do a find replace or a copy and then paste values and remove the text. But typically the reason I would do it this way with all these nested formulas and stuff is so that I don't change the source data, but if you copied it or something and then tried some stuff out that way, I think that'd be okay.
I think this is great for macros because I have a lot of reports that I pull out and I'm constantly doing this, and that value substitutes. Fantastic.
Cool. Yeah, I'm glad, again, glad this is working. A lot of VLOOKUP formulas do break. And then, yeah, specifically when you're getting to macros and you kind of have to loop over several values, a lot of data cleansing with macros is fantastic. And then for the people that don't necessarily want to program quite as much, you do also have the option of Power Query, which we may get into in a future Excel lesson. That you may not have to do quite so much if you are not familiar with programming. It's a little bit more point and click friendly. Any other questions before we move on to this spend data example, like a large list of spend data, pulling in those descriptions and categories? If not, I will move on. All right. So here we have some sample spend data. It's about 1,500 rows of PO lines information. We got a date, a number, we got item numbers, UOMs, price and quantity, and then the line totals, which is just your price multiplied by your quantity. This is about a year's worth of data. Obviously, your data sets are probably going to be considerably larger than 1,500 lines for a year's worth of PO lines. But for this example, this is kind of the sample data that you may get when you pull a report out of the system, or if you run a SQL query or something like that, and then you get an exported data set. But unless I know all the item numbers off the top of my head, I can see what we purchased, but I'd have to go to this list of items, look up the item number, maybe filtering it to get my description and my category, and probably insert here and copy and paste back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And even on 1,500 rows, that's a lot of work. That's hours of filtering a list and doing this back and forth. With a VLOOKUP, you're going to save a lot of time so that you don't necessarily have to go back and forth all day long, copying and pasting, which is also prone to error, especially if you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. Category. Yeah. Okay, so what I want to do is pull in the category and the description of these items, these fun Halloween items for this data set that I've got here. Luckily for me, I can use a VLOOKUP formula and save a lot of time. So again, going back to our VLOOKUP, I can look up this value, my lookup table. The value that I'm looking up needs to be in a left column. Anything to the right of something that I'm looking up is fine. But if I, for example, wanted to look up a category and then find item description or item number, that would not work. So make sure whatever you're using as your lookup here matches to the leftmost column in your lookup table. So I want to find in this range, again, very important, lock this cell reference using the F4 key. So as I drag down, it's only going to reference back to this lookup table exactly. I'm going to pull back my, again, 1, 2, 3, second column here. I want to pull back the description. Now I have the description. It looks it up. And just to do a spot check here, C800112. I look down this list, I passed it, C800112, I return a cauldron. That is correct. I do the same thing for my category. I'm going to do a VLOOKUP formula for that one and looking up the same value here. Looking this up and locking those cells in. I want to return the category, which is in my column 1, 2, 3. I'll type the 3 in, do an exact match. And cooking supplies. Just a spot check again. Yes, that is correct. So now I can copy these formulas down all the way to the end. It's going to take forever with 1,500 rows. So instead, I'm just going to hover over this until the little plus sign turns from this white plus sign into this little black plus sign, and I'll double click and it will fill down. Now I've just cut my my whole day from copying and pasting into about, what is that, 2 minutes? Now I have a data set where I know what items I purchased and category, and I could filter these as well. So if I wanted to add some filters, I could just see, all right, for my beverage mixes, here's my spend. Even better than that is when we use, back to tables, Excel tables. So if I try to redo this whole process using Excel tables, it's even faster. I don't even have to fill all that stuff down. So let's see how we can use tables instead. Anybody remember the shortcut key for creating a table? Shout it out.
Or
Sorry, one more time.
Control T.
Correct.
that's right.
Control T. If you wanted to as well, you could come up to this home tab, format as table. You could do it that way too. Control T. I have headers in this data set, so I'm gonna click that. Anybody remember my next step? What should I do with kind of a vague table? Should I give it a name by chance? I think I will. I'm going to name this spend data. Also, a quick note on names. If you try to add spaces, this will not work. If I try to do spend space data, I'm going to see this error message. You can add underscores for spaces if you want to. You cannot have a space in there. If you want to start it with a number, add an underscore first. So if you did, for example, 2021 sales, add an underscore and then write 2021 sales. And we saw this third error here. You can't have two tables with the exact same name. So when I click OK there, it's going to revert back to the default table 4. So I'm going to do spend data there, and I've named it by clicking the enter key. So now if I wanted to refer to anything in this table, I can now refer to spend data. I'm going to do the same thing on my items and categories. Rename this as item list. So now when I want to go do a VLOOKUP, I see that I'm looking up my item number from the spend data table. I'm going to my item list, pulling back the second column for description. I'm getting an exact match, and now it fills all the way down my 1,500 rows. I'm going to do the same thing for my categories. And instead of going to that page, I remember that my table name is item list. So I can just start typing it and press tab to autocomplete that. Looking up my third column. Now I have my categories. much faster, much easier to read when you're trying to
That's
troubleshoot
beautiful.
your formulas. Sorry?
That is beautiful. I love that.
Thank you.
Time this afternoon was worth just getting that because that'll really help me. Now I
Excellent.
understand why we would want them. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of Excel tables. There are some instances that they are somewhat troublesome, but I find that their value is something that outweighs some of that trouble. Again, when you have an Excel table, it automatically comes with filters as well, which is huge when you have a lot of rows of data and you're trying to slice and dice this thing. So any questions about that VLOOKUP example? Nothing, okay. So since we have a little extra time, we have the ability to add a little bit of extra bonus lesson in here. So I have this massive data set here of a whole bunch of items, and maybe I would want to create a report off of this. I've got dates, I've got PO numbers, I've got items, and I've got line totals and quantities. How might I want to summarize this? Who here who requests a lot of reports, how would you want to see this data?
Pivot.
Yeah, I would
Pivot
have said
table?
pivot, but maybe you're going to give us a graph or something.
No, I was actually talking about a pivot.
Yay.
So yes, pivot tables, hooray. So for those of you who are not familiar with pivot tables, if somebody asked you, all right, what's our line total for, say, cooking supplies or or for poison for the past year by month, you'd have to do some pretty complicated formulas to get that to work. Instead, you could take this data set and summarize it with a pivot table. Luckily, that is one of our options in this table design menu up here, summarize with a pivot table. Because I have named this as an Excel table, it recognizes that I'm clicked into the spend data table and it automatically picks that up. I don't have to highlight the whole thing. It knows, okay, I'm within the bounds of a named Excel table object. This is probably what you want to summarize. So here's the whole data set. By default, you can select a different range, but this is what I want to summarize. By default, it will, if you just click OK, it will appear on a new worksheet. If you wanted it to show up on an existing worksheet, you could. Typically, I would recommend if you're going to do a pivot, put it on a new worksheet because some of those pivots can behave a little erratically when they're expanding or summarizing a lot more data if you're adding continuously to the bottom of another data set. So I will click OK. I get a brand new sheet, which is just going to be a very imaginatively named sheet, sheet 2. So I'm going to say this is spend by month. And now, because I'm connected to that spend data, I want to see the items dropped into my rows here. And for my columns, I'm going to use PO dates. And for my values, I'm going to pull in my line totals. So in my rows, I can see this as a list. Here, I've got my, when I pull in PO date, it recognizes that that is a date and automatically breaks it out into years, quarters, and then the PO date itself. I don't really necessarily need the quarters, but I'll expand these so you can see how it breaks out. So I get quarters and stuff, and I don't necessarily want those. So I'm just gonna click and drag quarters and pull that out. I only want the year and the month. So just some quick cleanup here, formatting this the way that I prefer to see it. now I've got these items by month, and then a grand total for all the items, and then formatting these to kind of show some currency rather than just numbers, because we are talking about spend here. I've summarized that whole data set in a number of minutes rather than, again, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, trying to figure out how to get those totals worked out. So for those of you that are familiar with pivots, this is, I think, the best way to summarize a lot of a large data set very quickly. In addition to that, you can add some filters to it. There are some by default, like an Excel table, but if you are so inclined, you can add under this new context menu for Pivot Table Analyze, you can insert a slicer. So if I wanted to do my item description or category, now I can click these and it will filter the list. So if I wanted to look at my cooking supplies, now it's just filtered down to that. If I wanted to look at hardware, I can see where my spend was, stuff like that. Any questions about pivot tables while we're talking about it? Nothing? All right. I think if you do have any questions, of course, please reach out. Let me jump back into my PowerPoint here. So if there's anything that you would like to learn for future Excel trainings, please send me an email at northtexasarm@gmail.com. Real quickly as well, in the resource library for a lot of these kinds of lessons, we do have, if you search in here for Excel, lots of websites here, and then YouTube links as well for any other further training that I may not have covered. It's a bit more generic, but it is definitely valuable information. So please take advantage of this new resource library that we do have. It is available to all of our members. So that is the end of my section of the presentation. Any other questions that anybody has now? If not,
Hey, Taylor, before we sign off here, I want to remind everybody that you will be getting a survey via email, and to please complete your survey because they help our chapter when we're trying to accomplish some of our national goals. There we go.
Excellent. Yeah. So yeah, last slide in our presentation there. Next meeting is going to be November 18th. And then, as Mary said, we got a survey coming out, so please respond to that. Thank you very much. Back over to you, Mary.
Thank you, Taylor. I have had great comments from people. Everyone appreciates the information and the sharing that you do for us in Excel and the formula. So we appreciate you very much. So with that, I will sign us off and hope everybody has a great rest of your week and happy Friday Eve.
Yes, happy Halloween Eve, everyone.
Thank you.